That's right, I'm back, for a brief moment anyway. What used to be the Satanic Views set is now a standard wall-mounted flat-screen TV and physical therapy equipment. Satanic Views was a comedy variety series that I rushed into production about 20 years ago. I was an optimistic young man in my 40s. I just needed an excuse to start a YouTube channel, and since I had all those leftover horror props and monster things, the satanic angle seemed like the perfect theme or gimmick. So I experimented with Satanic Views and started production in 2006. It's really painful for me to watch the earlier episodes because my video technology was so crude back then. My attempts at comedy were not always as funny as I had intended. It's more embarrassing than my old baby photos. But the previous time I made an episode was in 2016. When Donald Trump won his first presidential election. In that episode, I of course referred to Don the Con as president-elect and expressed concern about what was to happen. But I was still a little optimistic then, and I could not have foreseen just how absolutely disastrous things would become. It's also much more worse than I could have ever possibly predicted. I won't go into details about the infinite number of reasons I despise Don the Con, because that would take forever. Also, my liberal talking points would just seem like I'm quoting Seth Meyers, MS Now, Jimmy Kimmel, Young Turks, or Stephen Colbert. You've heard it all from these other sources. Instead, I shall share some opinions of my own that might be uniquely personal. An alternate take on the situation. That said, I was actually quite conservative on immigration for much of my life. My frustration with undocumented workers was really my only right-wing view. I've always been liberal on every other topic. For years, I was always yelling, "Build a fucking wall!" during certain political campaigns or commercials. So when Don the Con began his presidential campaign back around 2014 or 2015, he said those two words that ignorant me wanted to hear. He said, "anchor babies." So, for an hour or two, it looked like I might vote for Don the Con. Up to that point, I actually did not like him even way back then. But I knew he got rich building casinos and maybe other structures, and also that he was a spoiled, rotten, two-timing womanizer who hired high-class prostitutes. With those two aspects of his life, I thought he could build brothels to finance his border wall. After all, who knows more about hookers and construction than Don the Con? A district of legalized prostitution like in Amsterdam or someplace near Las Vegas. That's what moronic me was actually thinking. But instead, when he announced that the border wall will be built, he insisted that Mexico was going to pay for it. I just hung my head down in shame, knowing this would never happen. So I knew that Don the Con was either stupid or lying. Needless to say, my 2 hours as a Trump supporter ended right then and there. I then decided to read about the area connecting the US and Mexico and watched several documentaries. I found out about desert animals such as deer and tortoises who've been traveling those grounds for millions of years. A wall could tamper with their migratory patterns and could be ecologically disastrous. Then as the Trump years went on, I realized I have no problems with Mexicans just wanting better lives. It's the cop killers who stormed the Capitol on January 6th, the MAGA team, or maggots as I call them, Proud Boys, Klansmen, Oath Keepers, neo-Nazis, and other violent right-wing groups that really scare me. So what conman Trump did was stamp out the one right-wing view that I had. Trump pushed me even further to the left. I considered myself a liberal in 2014, but looking back on it, now I see that younger version of myself as being just a moderate. Anyway, as I was saying about the Satanic Views disappearance, I'll tell you what I've been up to. 2016 changed a lot of things. Up to that point, I was rather happy-go-lucky and could not make an episode of Satanic Views without me having a sense of humor. Things got so dark during Don the Con's first dictatorship that I was no longer carefree enough to make Satanic Views. I didn't have the desire to reach out to a large audience anymore. I entered my 50s and I instead focused on my local community and also the world of punk rock, which has always been anti-fascist. I became a DJ, or rather VJ, playing music videos, hard rock, and punk rock at several Arizona venues. Sometimes it was in between punk bands, and sometimes it was at my short-lived dance club, Spiderweb. This quarterly event was a throwback to the nightclubs I attended in California during the 20th century. It was a time and place when you could play punk videos at clubs and people would pay to get in. So I recently tried this for about 8 or 9 years, but the bottom line is, this is not the 1980s or 1990s. Younger generations did not grow up on old school ska or older school punk rock. I'd play some classic song that I thought everybody knew, and yet the dance floor was often empty. My generation is getting too old to dance, and my vintage songs fell on deaf ears. I was bounced around from venue to venue, and I just could not get enough people to show up. Then in my late 50s, we had the pandemic. No more nightclubs, crowds, or nightlife for me. But it seems people all over the world in lockdown decided to finally scratch film titles off their bucket lists. All of the feature-length movies I made as far back as 1983 were suddenly in demand. Every time I checked my email, I'd get PayPal messages saying, "You've got money." I was really surprised and caught off guard, but my low-budget videos were selling like hotcakes. Even the old 1980s movies like Ultra Cyborg and Android Man. Movies so old they were also released on these beta tapes. Never in my life did I ever even own a beta VCR. All 6 of my films kept selling out. I made countless trips to the post office with suitcases full of DVDs and VHS tapes. I made thousands of dollars from 2020 until about 2023. When the COVID vaccines came along, my sales finally dwindled. When the Damon Foster craze ended, I felt lonely and wanted attention. My brief period of sales finally made me want to make another feature. My previous movie was, Devils, Dragons, and Blood-Sucking Bats. After that, along came YouTube and Satanic Views. I assumed nobody wanted physical media anymore, but nearly 20 years after Devils, Dragons, and Blood-Sucking Bats, I came out of retirement and made the sci-fi comedy of Mummies and Martians. It too sold very well, so I jumped right into my next movie, 2025's Gone with the Witch. So far, this steampunk fantasy has not had the same commercial success as Of Mummies and Martians, Age of Demons, and Devils, Dragons, and Blood-Sucking Bats. In fact, sales of physical media seem to have finally fizzled out, even for me. I'm just glad that my tapes and discs were able to coexist with streaming services up until about 2024. So let me get back to Satanic Views. Let's see, what else do I have to say about Satanic Views? I know. A problem which plagues many filmmakers. It's the issues caused by copyrighted music. 2 decades ago, they had something called fair usage. But because of widespread streaming and influencers, it seems fair usage doesn't exist anymore. I had assumed that so long as I wasn't making any money off of somebody else's music, it wasn't a problem. I always hoped that whoever had the rights would permit it if I gave them credit, and that this exposure might get more people to know the band's music. Time will tell if this video gets muted or copyright flagged, but it's another reason that I don't want to do Satanic Views anymore. Anyway, getting back to my feature-length movies. Going forward, my plan is to chop 2 of my movies into segments. They will be episodes with cliffhangers, and I'll upload them here. I don't know if I'll do Satanic Views anymore. I don't currently have any interest in reviving Satanic Views. I'll instead be uploading my fictional series based on my original characters, the Purple Lin Kuei. So I'm probably through with doing this here variety series and returning to my roots in fiction, action, and storytelling. So, Ecomaniacs begins, presenting my return trip to Australia. If you've been watching Satanic Views both these decades, you know that I've flown to Australia before. The 14-hour flight is always uncomfortable and exhausting. Worse yet, after our arrival in Sydney, our hotel room would not be available for several hours. So, we killed time at some museum of natural history. The footage you see of me here in my hotel room in Sydney is one of the few times on this vacation that I'll use my camcorder. For over 30 years, I've been a camcorder guy, but it's now the age of the smartphone, and by comparison, camcorders now seem large, heavy, cumbersome, and clunky. So here I am, like everybody else in the entire human race, shooting videos on a cell phone. They certainly have leveled the playing field. Anyway, once I'd gotten refreshed, I tried to introduce myself to the world of smartphone video making. The first footage I shot in Sydney was a strange post office that had statues in the window. I'm not used to the vertical aspect ratio of the smartphone. I grew up on widescreen pictures that look more cinematic. I knew right then and there that it was going to be a tough transition from camcorder to smartphone. So after a good night's sleep, we got on a boat to return to my favorite amusement park, Sydney's Luna Park. This fun theme park is an obvious homage to the American amusement parks of the 20th century. To me, it's magical because its funhouse, called Coney Island, is so much like the funhouse that used to be at the Santa Cruz Beach and Boardwalk. If I'm not mistaken, the Santa Cruz place replaced their funhouse with some fucking golf course. Unfortunately, my favorite thing at Sydney's Coney Island was closed for repairs. As you can see from this 2005 footage, a much younger, thinner me got to ride the Joy Wheel 20 years ago. It brought back fond memories of my childhood in the 1970s, so I was quite disappointed. This is an interesting comparison, though, seeing the older footage taken from a high-8 videotape and comparing it with the more vibrant imagery of a cell phone. One good thing about the long-overdue return to Luna Park is that its scariest ride, the sledgehammer, did not make me throw up this time. 20 years ago, I had to vomit in the bathroom. But after that 2005 vacation, I developed a system that always works. Now I always prepare for amusement park excursions. I have no breakfast that day other than Dramamine. To counter the possible narcotic effect, I consume caffeine. I don't eat until after I've ridden the spinning rides. The next day, we went back to the first place I ever did an aquarium dive with sharks. But the Sea Life aquarium that I went to was closed. The structure was boarded up and had graffiti. I was rather sad to see it no longer functional because it was once a place that was so close to my heart. So we went to Madame Tussauds Wax Museum located at Darling Harbor. It's definitely one of the better wax museums I've visited because you can walk right up to the wax figurines. Wouldn't you know it, the new Sea Life Aquarium was right next door. It has simply relocated to 15 Wheat Road, right on the huge dock, conveniently located in the middle of a tourist hub. So we retraced our steps and did the shark dive again. What I remember about the first time was that Aussies refer to sand tiger sharks as nurse sharks. We Americans, however, consider nurse sharks to be those cute little tropical sharks you see in places like Belize. In 2005, I remember walking around Sea Life Aquarium's older location and knowing that I'd be in the tank with nurse sharks, but I was expecting the American definition of nurse sharks, the puppy dogs of the shark world. Not only that, but the thick glass had a reverse magnification effect, making all the fish look much smaller when you're in the public viewing area. So, needless to say, I was quite surprised to find myself swimming with 10-foot sand tigers instead of 5-foot nurse sharks 2 decades ago. Although this return trip down under had so far been a disappointment the second time around, Sea Life Aquarium's shark dive was just as fun this time as it was 20 years ago. Otherwise, I found Sydney to be much more crowded than it was 2 decades ago. The first time I came to Sydney, I wanted to move there permanently. But this time, I just could not wait to get out and get on the next leg of this vacation. So we got on a plane that I briefly thought was on fire, but it was just some harmless mist coming from the air conditioning. So we were off to Cairns, another place which once brought me so much pleasure. It was nice to be away from Sydney's hustle and bustle and in lush, tropical green suburbia. I'm not sure, but I may have had my first encounter with a cane toad.
I don't know what kind of toad this is. This might be a cane toad that I caught. I think I'll lick him and find out. Whoa, oh dude, that's a cane toad. I have no idea. Alright buddy, letting you go.
Okay, here's my dilemma. I just handled a cane toad, and this cottage only has one sink. It's in the bathroom and it's being occupied, and I cannot find hand sanitizer.
But the real animal encounter that I was hoping for in this area of Australia called Atherton Tableland for some reason is bats. As documented in earlier Satanic Views episodes, I just loved visiting the bat hospital back around 2006, I guess. Back then I stayed here for several days as a volunteer. The wonderful place really had a grassroots feel to it, but today it was bigger, more polished, and with paid employees. This time, I was only here as a paying tourist, basically just another face in the crowd. But it doesn't matter what a spoiled, egotistical American like me thinks. The bottom line is that the Tolga Bat Place is now more efficient and able to care for more flying foxes and other species of bat. Our next disappointing animal encounter was in Port Lincoln. Even at Port Lincoln's airport near the baggage claim, they hyped up Calypso Star's great white shark cage dive with these videos. Little did I know it, but this would be the only time I would see a great white shark. I'm not blaming the good folks at Calypso Star because wild animal encounters can sometimes be unpredictable. Even though we got up before sunrise and spent hundreds of dollars, there's just no guarantee that the sharks will show up. But we kept our fingers crossed that our tour would be the exception to recent reports. We had received warnings that no sharks had been seen in the area for almost a week. If we canceled, then they would have only had half of our payment refunded to us.
Well, this is probably the only great white shark that I'll see today.
So, since we had no other plans that day, we tried being optimistic and got on the boat with the other tourists. On that long boat ride, my mind wandered and I noticed a pattern was developing. There were always Muslim families and tourists of various colors at the amusement parks and zoos. But the Asians, Middle Easterners, and Africans never took part in the thrill-seeking activities. For this supposed shark dive, it was all white people like us. White Australians, white Canadians, and white Americans. It never occurred to me before, but Islamic tourists and other dark-skinned vacationers seem to avoid exotic animal encounters and adrenaline rushes. While in the shark cage with all these friendly fishes and no sharks, I kept wondering what the many non-white tourists and hijab-wearing mothers were doing when they were not playing it safe at family-friendly tourist traps. It was the same thing at the bars and restaurants.
When we do touristy stuff, we see a lot of Asians and a lot of Middle Easterners. And yet when we're eating at the pubs and the restaurants, it's all whites.
The Indians and Pakistanis must have gone out of their way to avoid light-skinned people hangouts. It's a strange disconnect that I don't understand. Anyway, it was just us European descendants at Crocosaurus Cove, located in Darwin. As always, only us crackers wanted to get in the water with a huge crocodile. The activity is called the Cage of Death, but it's perfectly safe because the huge reptile cannot break through the plexiglass container that's lowered into the humongous crocodile's aquarium. I knew it was safe the whole time, and yet there's something unnerving about being mere inches from a reptilian carnivore that is twice my size. Friends of mine saw that I'd posted some of these photos right after we enjoyed the so-called Cage of Death. People kept posting things like, "No way," and "Not me," and so on. It's actually quite safe, because the crocodile is waiting for meat dangling on a hook. That's why he comes so close to the transparent protective enclosure. One thing I noticed about Darwin is that there are all these Aboriginal people on the streets. There must be some class distinction that I have no concept of. I have no idea why so many indigenous people are wandering around, apparently drunk. On a lighter note, Darwin is a really fun place to interact with wild rock wallabies. At the ranger station or whatever, you can buy food that's healthy for these friendly marsupials. But afterwards, it's back to the bars recommended by ape-descended Caucasians. If you thought those Aborigines were intoxicated, just listen to my drunken attempt at humor.
All right, here we are in a bar in Darwin, and I have mixed two different drinks together to get the right flavor. So it's my invention. I call this drink Sexual Conquest of the Planet of the Apes.
At some lake, I saw what I thought were spiders walking backwards. I just assumed they were all tipsy too, but it turns out they're just uniquely colored ants. Their heads have a color that's similar to the rump of California jumping spiders. Anyway, shortly thereafter, we went on a tour of Darwin's Litchfield Park. This Litchfield Park is almost as hot as Arizona's Litchfield Park. My first animal encounter at Litchfield Park was a leech. He was so cute, I just wanted to say, "He followed me home, can't we keep him?" I think he made a mistake and thought I was a fish. He tried climbing off of me, and whenever I pulled on him, I was afraid the leech would tear in half. But he was eventually released with no harm to either of us.
This has got to be the friendliest leech I've ever seen. Granted, I've not seen a lot of leeches in my life, but I don't know how to get rid of him.
Bystanders gave me funny looks when I showed concern for this parasitic mollusk. But I've always cherished encounters, even with the smallest exotic animals that I've not seen before. Not being intimidated by leeches, I got right back into the murky, algae-filled water and swam up close to both a baby crocodile and a monitor lizard crawling on the riverbanks. The monitor looked to be about 2 feet long. I don't know if it's young or full grown, but the most amazing tiny animal encounter was totally unexpected. We experienced strange sensations on our feet and looked down. Freshwater lobsters go by many names: crawfish, crawdads, crayfish, and so on. Many of these crustaceans climbed up our legs. I don't know if they were eating tiny parasites, dead skin, or whatever. Whatever they were prying from our feet, I'm sure they were doing us a favor. They're all just eating, but as always, I read things into it and feel like I'm bonding with new friends. I'm surprised these aquatic scavengers were not listed in tour books or websites. I would have made the 14-hour flight just to feed them. By now, my 2 weeks on the Australian East Coast were almost over. Time to fly back to the US. But there was one last species of tiny, strange animal that I wanted to experience. I had heard of fruit-eating bugs known as acid-spraying ants. They shoot acid at any predator who gets too close to their nests. These acidic insects are also known as yellow crazy ants and are an invasive species. I imagine their airborne liquid would really irritate the eyes. But the only time I ever tasted antacid was when I used Pepto-Bismol, Tums, or Rolaids. Now I can finally find out what genuine antacid actually tastes like.
It tastes good. It tastes good at first, but ow, and they're biting me. Go back. Go back.
For this edition of Tales from the Critic, I'm reviewing the moody, mysterious drama The Servant. Depending on who you ask, this slow-paced TV show could almost be considered horror. That said, there's a spoiler alert here, So if you think you might watch this series on Apple TV, then don't watch the end of this review. I first started watching this Tony Bascalop program when it was new in 2019, but the moody, cliffhanger-like approach was annoying. I'm just not a fan of mysteries. Now that The Servant is complete, it's best to binge watch it, or at least watch these mysterious episodes at your leisure to minimize the frustration. I admit that the acting, writing, and overall production deserves 3 stars out of 5. But I must deduct a star because of the strange approach. The way it straddles the line from drama to mystery to horror got on my nerves. Lead character Leanne Grayson, played by Lauren Ambrose, seems to be a magical witch from some religious cult. They never call her a witch, but the inconsistent approach left me constantly wondering, does she have magic powers or not? Can she do molecular transformation and shape-shifting? Is she really changing some doll into a real flesh and blood baby? I spent the whole show trying to think scientifically instead of enjoying the character development. This poorly explained plot hole is made all the worse when you realize the house has security cameras all over. And yet, none of the nanny cams seem to show how that rubber doll keeps becoming a real baby. The couple who hire the mysterious Leanne also got on my nerves. The husband is a gourmet chef who brings dead animals into his kitchen, and occasionally live animals that are killed in the kitchen. I found these scenes to be absolutely disgusting, and I had to look away several times. Equally irritating is the mother, Dorothy. Being a mother, she's absolutely obsessed with that damn baby that sometimes becomes a doll. The twerp is all she talks about, and she really got on my nerves. Though I've focused on the bad points, I was intrigued by this weird drama. If you're in the mood for something unusual, check out the first episode, or maybe the first 2 episodes, and see if it's your cup of tea. And now for the spoiler. All the intelligent drama goes up in flames during the final episode where it's revealed Leanne really did have all these magic powers after all. Instead of an intelligent ending where she becomes a normal girl and has a new life, there's some big fire. I guess she sacrifices herself and burns to death. Pretty stupid ending to an otherwise interesting story. She should have volunteered her magic to science. How to change latex into human flesh. Think of the benefits to the prosthetic limb industry. Now that would have been an interesting finale. But no, they instead went the predictable route and decided to rip off movies such as Carrie and Fatal Attraction, and also reminded me of The Hand That Rocked the Cradle and Firestarter. But I've actually never seen either of those movies, so I don't know. So there you have it, what is probably my final episode of Satanic Views. If it does return, it will be more like this episode was, featuring only myself. It was always difficult to get friends and neighbors over here to play extras, and I'm just not the social butterfly I was 20 years ago. I no longer have that sort of energy. And I am also tired of pretending that I'm a big fan of death metal and horror movies. So on this channel, I shall return to my nerdy roots in fictional characters, script writing, action, comedy, drama, continuing characters, and other geeky fantasy elements. I'm putting final touches on these props, which might represent the next phase of this YouTube channel. Of course, nobody can predict the future with 100% accuracy. Well, I thank you for your time.